And thanks for the introduction, and let's dive right in. We can skip this one. As you just heard, I'm the head of engineering at Coda for the last 3 years, and before that time, I spent 14 years as a VP engineering at Google and worked on all the good stuff, many parts of YouTube for many years. I ran Google Shopping and Google Travel, also for many years at Google, and built good stuff that I'm really proud of, like Google Flights. And now I'm at Coda. And in case you're not familiar with Coda, Coda is an all-in-one document, an all-in-one digital workspace. And as such, it blends the flexibility of documents with the structure of spreadsheets and allows you to build documents that are as powerful as applications. And this year, we added the intelligence of AI to it. You'll see a few examples throughout the presentation. So now one thing to note at Coda is we have a reputation for shipping thoughtful things quickly. For example, we shipped over 100 features this year already, and it gets frequently commented on by customers, as you can see from the quotes here. So I thought for this talk, I'm going to talk about, okay, how did we actually increase the execution at Coda? What's the secret sauce? And because this is the time of the year when you have to think more and more about planning for next year, I'm doing a special focus on the topic of planning as part of this talk. So I'm going to talk about 3 ingredients of that secret sauce, the 3 key ingredients, and let's dive directly in with the first one, the golden rule of planning. Now, any engineering, any product leader will tell you that planning is at the very core, at the very heart of any functioning organization. It's very important. And at the same time, when you talk to them about planning, and I like to do that, maybe because I'm German, I don't know, they typically then immediately also start complaining about their planning process. It takes way too long, it's confusing, it's not good, the outcome isn't great. So it's a controversial topic. When I joined Coda, I took over the company-wide planning process for Coda, and we had a good process. The first 2 weeks, we planned quarterly, and the first 2 weeks of every quarter were spent as planning weeks, and then the remaining we had 1 week of hackathon, and then the remaining like 9 or 10 weeks are spent executing. That sounded good, but a number of teams approached me and said, hey, now that you're running planning, can we add a 3rd week to planning because the resulting plans are not good enough? And they had a point. They were sometimes not great. And that would have taken us, if you do the math, to about spending 25 to 30% of our time in the quarter planning, leaving the rest for execution and the rest. And that sounded like an awful lot. But I mentioned I often talk to other companies, our customers, other people I randomly meet on the street about how much time they spend planning, and 25 to 30% is a pretty typical number I hear from many companies. So I did the obvious thing and said, okay, what we'll do is we'll do the opposite of what you're asking. We'll cut the planning time in half and see how that goes. And this has led to something that I now call my golden rule of planning. You shall not spend more than 10% of your time planning. But to completely, no BS here, to be completely transparent, at the time I was doing that, I had no idea whether it would work or not. The idea between the golden rule of planning is don't spend more than 10% of your time planning isn't really to take away any of the value that planning provides. That's obviously very important, but to actually value the time spent on execution disproportionately more. And now everybody has a thought in their head of, okay, but if you don't spend enough time planning, you'll have crappy plans, and that will lead to lousy execution, so you just shot yourself in the foot. And that could be true, but in my experience and in my opinion, if you do it the right way, you can actually, by cutting planning down shorter, improve the quality of planning output at the same time. And if you think about it, that's particularly, you have to be very efficient, you have to be super focused, and you actually have to use good tooling support to get down to 10%. But you should be doing all those things anyway. So at Coda, when we cut the planning time in half, as I said, it wasn't clear to me whether it would work or not. We actually had a fantastic planning cycle. We shrunk it down to a single week. We had a measurable improvement at the end of the quarter when we measured the quality of the plans. We had subjectively better results because we surveyed all the teams about their happiness with the planning process, and that saw a big increase in happiness. And third of all, we got an additional week in the quarter to build and ship more stuff. So it was a big success, and then I thought for this talk, you might be interested in how did we actually do it and why did it work. So that's what the next couple of slides will be about. The first thing is when cutting down from 2 weeks to 1 week, we had to be super explicit about who has to do what exactly when. So we had clear guidance. We cut the planning process into this M-shaped process with 4 phases. In the reflection phase, teams write up what they did last quarter, and most importantly, what needs to change, what failed and needs to change. Then, very briefly but important, the leadership team provides short guidance. This is focused on only providing direction. There's no details in that guidance. And then the bulk of the time we spend in bottom-up planning. So 3 out of 5 days we spend in that bottom-up planning phase. That's when every team is drafting their OKRs. And then we added a phase at the end that we didn't really explicitly have in my Google time. I don't have a good name for it, so I call it the integration phase. And that is mostly when leaders are going in and taking charge of the plan again, and they're trying to resolve all the prioritization conflicts that are there, any outstanding issues, and in particular, they search for teams that have overcommitted themselves. And then we're done, the week is over, we switch back to execution. Now, as I said, initially was surprised how well this actually worked. And there's one, I think, insight I learned from the first time we did that, and that is that actually speed drives focus. So if I go back to my time at Google or at companies I worked before Google, we were planning for many weeks. Actually, if we were doing annual planning, we would often plan for 6 months, for the next year. And because that's such a long time, we did planning parallel to our day jobs. That's a lack of focus. And second, it provided this vacuum where the teams are still executing on the old plan. Leadership attention is already drafting new plans. So nobody pays that much attention to the old ones, whereas you have this long period possibly with that vacuum, which is another form of lack of focus. But now if you shrink the planning time really close together, you suddenly can see, you'll see that you can afford to be 100% only doing planning, with a single exception, the engineer who's carrying the pager. They can't do that. But everyone else, there's no other normal meetings in there in that planning week. The only thing they're doing is planning. At the same time with the leadership time, like our CSO is entirely blocked. We can't block him for an entire week or anything like that. That's unthinkable. But in planning week, on the day of integration, his entire day is blocked, and that's the only thing that he'll be doing the entire day. The next thing we had to do is, we had to really use good tooling every step along the way. But you should do that anyway, but really trying to be super efficient really forced us to use the best tooling. The good thing is we work at Coda, and that's literally our job to build these tools, so we also got to use them. Some of my favorite tools in planning are listed here, and they have a short link if you want to check them out. The $100 voting, for example, is a great tool for prioritization decisions. I love Bullpen. I'll go into that in a second. Idea gardening is a fantastic tool as well, and Dory voting as well. So many tools, they can tremendously help speed up things and at the same time help you make better decisions. But all of that would have not worked for one more thing, and that's a thing that I always found the hardest thing in my time at Google when we were planning. And the problem is, and I'm sure you'll all face the same problem, that any project you're doing or any OKR that the team is trying to get done, they will depend on one or more other teams to do something to support them. So they have a planning dependency. And now that means in planning time, you have this complexity where potentially every team has to talk to every other team, and then again when the plan changed, and try to coordinate that. And most planning is done in spreadsheets, or at Google we had a tool called Easy OKRs. They don't support tracking those dependencies and managing that. That means there's typically a shadow process that's dealing with those dependencies, and shadow processes effectively means a lot of meetings and a lot of time spent on that. And every single time I finish planning before, when we did the final presentation, there were always still these surprises of a team being surprised that that other team is doing X, and that they need to do something to support X, and they have not completely factored that into their plan because they haven't been aware. So that's when you missed a dependency. When I joined Coda, what we did is we changed our planning tool, our planning document, to explicitly have teams write down these dependencies. So while they're writing their OKR, as part of writing an OKR, they write down which other team they need to do what to help them with that OKR. So it's explicitly written down. And the other teams, in the same time, they get an immediate notification that some other team needs something from them, so that they, while they're still drafting their plan, they can set time aside for those asks from the other teams. And that's when, most of the time, they click that acknowledge yes button in here. But they can also reject that dependencies or mark it for discussions if it's not clear. About only 10% or so of the dependencies that we have at Coda actually lead to the need of a meeting that needs to happen to discuss it. 90% get resolved without a meeting. And for the meeting that we then need to have, there's another fantastic ritual that I really like and that saved us a ton of time. And that's in that last part of planning, when there's some outstanding decisions that are important and still need to make, we use something we call the Coda bullpen. It's effectively like a document. We have reserve people's time and calendar. We have a large block of time allocated in calendar, and then the document is basically managing how that time is spent. So people can go in and say, I need a decision on this, and these are the people I need for that decision. And then the document, and here's how long I think, or how complex this problem is. And the document will basically then algorithmically schedule that meeting for that day, looking for who's available when and handling that. That's been incredibly effective. It allows, in particular, the people that are a bottleneck at Coda to get through a huge number of decisions way more effectively than if we were to just schedule normal meetings. Well, and that way, the dependencies are tracked. There's no nasty surprises at the end. Teams are aware of what's expected of them. And we have a more efficient process, meaning fewer meetings to actually get through the dependencies. So we're at the same time faster and better. And that is the first part of the talk. Before I switch to the second one, I just want everybody to think briefly about, in your opinion, what is the most important part of planning? I'll give you my answer. In my opinion, the most important part of planning is executing the plan. Because it doesn't matter how fantastic, if you do everything I just said, and you have an awesome plan, and you run the smoothest planning process in the world, and everything is awesome, if you're not executing the plan, it's still a big waste of time. It's completely worthless, actually. So execution is the important thing, which is the next part of this talk. Typical stuff, then turning from planning into execution mode is surprisingly hard very often, and I've always wondered why that's the case. There's typical complaints that you hear or anti-patterns that you see at that point in time. For example, leaders saying, well, we lack real insights in how the execution is actually tracking against the plan. Or plans don't survive the first day of contact with reality. Or teams, and this happens to me all the time, I get caught up in one part of the plan and forget about the other part until it's too late. And often I hear complaints about a feeling of lack of accountability as well. And I've been thinking about what's actually the root cause behind these issues. Why is this so hard? And I think this, and then I found a few stats that I put together on this slide. I think that's the root cause behind the problem. So in a typical company, in the planning process per planning cycle, the number I found is that on average 200 documents, they could be documents or spreadsheets or presentations, get produced. First of all, that in itself is a problem. But then also when we turn, that's the plan on one side, but then when we turn to execution and look at all the tools that are needed and need to work together to execute the plan, again, in an average company, there's over 250 different tools that are needed to execute that plan, which means there's this gigantic matrix of 200 by 254 that somehow needs to bridge. There's this huge divide between the planning environment and the execution environment. And typically that's bridged in a manual and expensive ways. That's why if you ask engineers to stop writing code and write status updates, exactly because of that canyon, or all the different status update meetings that get scheduled, and all of that. Now, as an engineer, I think that's in very large parts actually a tooling issue more than any law of nature. It shouldn't be that hard. So what we've done at Coda is, first of all, we don't have 200 planning documents. That's crazy. We have one Coda document, and it has all the information in here, all the top-down guidance, all the presentations, all the OKR, the one OKR table. It's all in a single document. That reduces the number on the left from 200 to 1. But then more importantly, our teams are working in something that we call team hubs. And I'll actually go into detail on that. That's my third point of the presentation in a second. But they spend their normal days in their team hub. That's the environment they execute. They manage their tasks and everything. So now we can synchronize their OKRs into the team hub so that they have the OKRs in their team hub. Any edits, any updates they do in the team hub automatically get synced back to the central planning document. That way they don't have to go to a different tool for planning, for updating the plan. It's right there where they do all their other work. And it's not just with the team hubs. We literally do that principle and apply that everywhere. For example, all my one-to-one documents that I have a one-to-one doc with each of my reports, and all of them have their OKRs or their team's OKRs synced into the one-to-one doc so that they're always front and center when we're having a one-to-one meeting. All our leadership documents for our leadership meetings have a dashboard, a short version of the OKR table visualized at the top of the document. And we do other tricks as well along the same nature. I learned very early on that a lot of my engineers don't read emails, but they respond really well in Slack. And that's why the OKR document is actually actively pinging people in Slack when needed, because that's the way we get the fast response, and we don't rely on the engineers having to go there to check for something. They get a notification in Slack. The same thing, we can connect that document to Jira, Linear, or other tools as well if we would want to. And that way, basically, the plan information and all the updates live right where people spend every day during execution and get updated more or less automatically and stay in sync. And that saves us time, but at the same time also helps them always be in better quality. So again, allows us to be at the same time faster as well as better. And I promised I'll talk about the Team Hub because I just mentioned the Team Hub. And to be honest, if there's only one thing you remember from this entire talk, then remember the Team Hub, because that's been the biggest changer of my personal productivity for the last 3 years. So let's dive into that. I've shown this slide before. I want to focus on the right-hand side, that 254 different tools that get used. Now, of course, that's across different functions. No individual really uses 254 for tools. But if we zoom in and analyze how many tools are typically used for one project, it's still that a single project typically requires 10 different tools to be used. And that in itself is a number that will make teams feel disorganized and chaotic. And is it just that they feel disorganized and chaotic, or is there a real problem? I think there's a real problem here, because if you think about it, not just only 10 links or 10 browser tabs. It actually means you have 10 data silos that are not synchronized with each other. And that means you have to manually keep everything in sync. And that's a cumbersome process. It feels a bit like you're sprinting with the handbrake on, or whatever the equivalent of a handbrake is when you're sprinting. And it's not just a problem that we had both at Google or earlier at Coda and in other companies. Here's a quote from Zach at Tonal, he's a product manager, and he expresses it better than I can do. Let me just read the quote. So previously, our product system was fractured. PRDs lived in dozens of scattered Google Docs. Roadmaps and goals were duplicated across stale spreadsheets. Decisions were made with slide decks that became outdated the very moment they were shared. And this led to confusion from everyone on the team. Where's that link again? What's the latest progress on our OKRs? And worse, product managers wasted time copying, pasting, and retelling the same story again and again. Sounds super familiar to me as well. Now, we adopted the same solution that they adopted and that actually many of our customers are using, and that's a Team Hub. So what's a Team Hub? It's basically a document, a Coda document that can have many pages and will typically have a number of pages. And teams simply organize all their information in that single document, like literally everything. I showed you earlier how the OKRs from the central tracker would be synced in here, but they maintain their roadmap, all their tasks, their PRDs, their design docs, user studies. If they have an offsite, the offsite organization will happen here. It is literally everything that's related to that team. And finishing Zach's quote, or actually I'll let you read that yourself. That solves a whole lot of these coordination issues, that feeling of disorganization, those 10 data silos. And just to be clear and have no misunderstanding, of course we use a lot of other tools as well. But the good thing is in that Team Hub, we synchronize the information and maintain the information from the other tools. Like at Coda, we pull in GitHub information. We can pull in Jira. We pull in from Figma. Many teams pull in from Zoom their meetings, but also the transcripts of those meetings so that they can have AI summaries, for example. But it's a central hub, and all the information in those tools is contained from the central hub. And in that central hub, we can link between all these different data silos. And the second thing, and that's almost a nice side product of that process, is, well, everyone this year is trying to figure out how to use AI in the best way in the enterprise. So we integrated GPT, we integrated large language model into Coda. And the big problem with these models is, well, you need to provide them the right context so that they can do their work. But now if all your information is in the Team Hub, it's very easy for GPT to have all that context because it's like literally operating on the information in that document, and can provide you answers from that very effectively, way more effectively than, I don't know, if you copy and paste it and go to ChatGPT or somewhere else trying to provide it enough context. Again, this allows us to reduce the number of data silos that we have, speed up execution, and then be faster and better at the same time. And that concludes my talk. I talked about how we drive execution at Coda, and I walked you through 3 aspects. Quickly recapping, we aim at spending no more than 10% of our time planning. That forces a whole lot of improvements. And then we bring planning on one side and execution as closely together as we can. And last but not least, we organize all kind of other information that's needed for execution as well in those central team hubs. And as a last pointer, one of the best things actually of working at Coda is that I get to talk to a lot of you and to a lot of our customers about how they run their process and so on. And last month, I took some time and wrote up my learnings from that and from my own career into 2 handbooks. They're linked here. They basically condense the things I said in this talk and a whole lot more in an easy digestible version. And please give me feedback on any of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. That was amazing. I have looked at the engineering handbook. It's incredible, but I need to look at that other one because I didn't know about it yet.
Yeah, that's the newer of the 2.
Yes, all right. And just a reminder that Coda is one of our platinum sponsors, which means that you can learn all about it downstairs in the main floor, and I encourage you to check it out. Okay, so we have quite a few questions, actually. I'm going to ask the second one first. When you say planning, does that include roadmap planning? With roadmap planning, you mean, so we distinguish between quarterly planning and annual planning. And I assume that that's maybe what's meant with roadmap planning. So we run them as 2 separate processes. The quarterly planning is the concrete, what do we concretely get done in the quarter? And we run a separate but also very fast process, following the same principles, just for annual. That's the annual planning process. We call that the big rock. That's more the roadmap planning?
Yeah, the big rocks.
Okay, yeah, and that kind of answers 2 of the questions. Okay, can you break the time allocation by role
For example, do PMs and engineering leads both use 10% of their time planning, or does it change by role?
So first of all, the basic approach is planning is a group exercise. So there shouldn't be, if there's a huge divide of some people spend 80% of their time planning and other people 1%, that's a problem. However, there is still, it's not everybody spends the same hours. That's also not realistic. Like engineering managers, PMs tend to spend a bit more because A, they need to work on the top-down guidance. They're involved in basically the entire planning phase, in every single planning phase, yeah, from reflections, top-down guidance, bottom-up planning, and integration. That's where the leadership team, the PMs and engineering managers, and some of the TLs are active. So they spend the entire time. Like a typical engineer will be mostly active in the bottom-up planning phase, which is it's the longest phase, it's the most important one. That's where, yeah, most of the stuff gets figured out. That's about 60% of the total planning time. So some people 100%, other people 60%.
All right. Okay, we've had issues with executing quarterly plans because priorities shift mid-quarter. How would you approach planning cycles that are less than a quarter?
This is an awesome question. Because it's often forgotten, people often do quarterly planning and just assuming it's a law of nature that plans have to be quarterly. They don't have to. Yeah, you can, like in the early years of Coda, before I joined, Coda was actually operating on a 6-week planning cycle. And then eventually we found that that was no longer efficient and we switched to a quarterly planning cycle. When I was at YouTube, we switched multiple times between planning quarterly, like the rest of Google did, and then switched to a 6-month planning cycle because we noticed that there were not enough changes between 2 quarters, and we felt if we take a bit of a longer stance, that's helpful and also saves us planning time. So the duration that you're using for planning is an important variable that you can set, and that over time and the matureness of the company should change. So yeah, in that case, I would think through maybe you should just plan on a 6-week basis.
Okay, awesome.
Which, by the way, if you do that and follow the 10% rule, you need to cut it down from 1 week to half a week.
Oh my goodness. All right, we probably have time for one more question if anybody wants to ask a question live. Right
yes,
here?
one.
I put the question in Slido, but it's...
Oh, I'm sorry, it might be a lag.
That's fine. The question that I have is, what features does Coda provide to improve accountability of the plan for all the stakeholders involved in the plan?
That is an awesome question. So I'll repeat it in case you didn't all hear it. So the question is, what do we do, or how do we do this in Coda to provide accountability? So the key, there's one thing with accountability that's the key thing, and that is to be absolutely clear, yeah, on the responsibilities of everyone involved. So what we do is we have basically 3 fields that we have every OKR be filled out in. One is the team that's actually building it. Okay, that's obvious, yeah. That's often not sufficient because now there's a group of 10 people, which means that nobody's really responsible for it. Yeah. So then we have the next thing, we call that the driver, because driver starts with DRI, which also stands for directly responsible individual. And that is only one person, and it can only be one person. And that is the single person typically picked from that team, but technically doesn't have to, who is responsible at maintaining the OKR, making sure it's properly written, it gets updated regular. That's the person that gets pinged in Slack on that slide where I had the Slack pings. That's the person the document pings if something is off. And that's also the person who should trigger an escalation. And then this is more of an optional thing, and I have mixed feedback on that, but in some organizations super useful, is to have a third field, which is the sponsor, which is the more senior person who basically oversees this OKR and who's the first person the team can approach if something is looking weird or not going well or resources are off. Yeah, so that they don't have to do a full-blown escalation. They can go to their sponsor first. So depending on size of organization, that might be useful or not. That's it.
Are any of those templates you were showing us like available for people outside of the company?
Yes. We put some links in here. They're mentioned in the planning handbook and in the engineering handbook as well.
Very cool. All right, I'll check it out. Okay, one last question I'm going to ask. The same question I asked Chris. What do you enjoy so much that you lose track of time?
Yeah, I mean, just mentioned the planning handbooks. I can actually, as I was writing the planning handbooks over the last couple of weeks, what would happen very frequently is I'm sitting at home at the dinner table. I have one idea that I should write up. Would tell my kids, hey, I'm going to write this up really quickly, and then I bring you to bed. Well, and then I'm looking up from my computer, and it's past 10 p.m., and they've been asleep for 2 hours. And it's dark. Yeah, so I completely lost track of time.
So what's the next
doing that
handbook?
writing. Yeah.
I'm sure you've got one in the works.
Yes, yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. I really
Thanks, everybody.
appreciate your insights. All right.